This is Dr. Karen, and you are listening to the Facto Leaders podcast on the B Podcast Network, where I share up-to-date, evidence-based practices, my own experiences, and guest interviews designed to help pediatric therapists, educators, and aspiring school leaders design services that support social, emotional, and academic growth and set kids up for success in adulthood. Whether you want to learn effective strategies for your therapy session or classroom, be an influential leader on your team, or find creative ways to use your skills to advance in your career, I've got you covered. Hey everybody, it's Dr. Karen, and welcome to episode 197 of the De Facto Leaders podcast on the B Podcast Network. Scaffolding has become a buzzword when it comes to helping kids become more independent with academic and functional tasks, but it's only useful if people know what it means. Watching students or your own children struggle to transition or complete daily tasks can be uncomfortable for both the adults and children. As a result, it can be easy to get pulled into a situation where kids become prompt dependent. That's why I invited Rebecca Robbins to De Facto Leaders to talk about how to use declarative statements and strategic pausing to increase independence. Rebecca Robbins is a speech-language pathologist who has spent the bulk of her career helping children, young adults, and families impacted by autism. She has worked in various settings over the course of her career, including a private school for autistic children, early intervention and preschool agency work, as well as a public school. She is now the proud owner of Mind ShaperSLP, LLC, where she provides one-on-one speech therapy, executive functioning, and life skills coaching for individuals. In addition, Rebecca provides parent online training programs and consultation services. Rebecca lives in Pennsylvania and provides services in the Hudson Valley, New York, and in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania. In this conversation, we discuss parent coaching and ponder why it's emphasized in early intervention, but we aren't doing it as much for school-age kids and adolescents. What does it mean to act as kids' executive functioning? Directive statements, explicit teaching, reflective questions, and pauses. How to use these strategies and fade prompts. Getting started with coaching and consultation. What strategies can we teach adjacent disciplines and caregivers to improve carryover? Be sure to check all the show notes for all the places you can go to connect with Rebecca. Also, before we get going, I wanted to remind you to check out the School of Clinical Leadership, my program that helps related service providers develop a strategic plan for putting executive functioning support in place in collaboration with their school teams. A lot of these concepts that we discuss in this conversation, including how to fade prompts, are things that I show you how to do in the School of Clinical Leadership, and I also show you how to put a strategic plan in place so you can think about how to use those other service delivery models like coaching and consulting. To learn more about the School of Clinical Leadership, you can go to drkarendudek-brannan.com/clinical leadership. Now, please enjoy this conversation with Rebecca Robbins. Today, I am joined by Rebecca Robbins, the Mind ShaperSLP. So thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thank you so much for having me, Karen.
So returning guest, it's been a few years though. So I'm sure you're working on a lot of different things since we last talked. You were actually one of the very first guest interviews that I had on the podcast back when it was called Are They 18 Yet? So I'm excited to talk to you again.
Yeah, me too. Thank you for having me back.
Yeah, so do you want to just share, we'll obviously link to your first episode, but do you want to just share a little bit about yourself and then some of the things that you've been working on the last couple of years up till now?
Sure, yeah. So, like you said, my name is Rebecca Robbins. I started Mind ShaperSLP back in 2019, and we focus on helping autistic individuals create fruitful and fulfilling lives along with their families. I have a big focus on parent training with what I do. I feel like parents are really the experts on their children, and the more that we can help support parents in how to interact with their children outside of the school day in ways that are really going to help them thrive to their fullest potential, then the better chances that their children are going to grow up to become as independent as possible. So right now we focus mostly on direct services. I'm in the PA or near Philly area, and we also have a leg in the Hudson Valley, New York. And I started a social group called Buddy Group. And I started in 2018, actually, before I went full time with my private practice. And we have since expanded. At first, it was for ages 8 through 12. And now we've expanded all the way up into young adults in their 20s. And the bulk of our classes now are teens and young adults. And we do virtual classes for anyone in New York or PA, and also in-person classes in New York. And I'm working on finding a way to convert the curriculum so that we can get it into schools to really help schools teach neurodivergent children how to socialize in ways that honor their neurotype, but also help them connect with others and make friendships and have fulfilling social connections.
Yeah, great. So I love how I want to go back to talking about the different format, especially the parent training, because, I work with a lot with therapists who are in the schools. And a question that I get a lot is, people will be like, well, do you have something that offers social skills lesson plans? And I want it to be, 20 minutes a day, this many times a week for a group. And they're very focused on this one model of service delivery. And of course, you do need to have, like, part of the intervention is direct intervention. You need to have interactions with students in a therapy setting. But then if you don't have the parent training, and then I would argue in the schools, the teacher training or the training of all the staff, a lot of times the biggest pain point that I hear from clinicians is I'm just not seeing generalization. So I know you said, parents are the experts in their child, but like what else made you really focus on the parent training in your private practice?
And thank you for mentioning that. Yeah, parent training is a big part of the Buddy Group program. The parents get homework in our classes, not the students.
Yeah.
And that parent homework is just focusing on, like, hey, this is what we learned today. And they get access to all of the materials that I use to teach. And then the homework is, here's how you can carry it over in both structured ways and embedding it into your life. Because everybody's busy. So I originally, the reason that I came up with this foundational philosophy that I wanted my practice to be built around was because I always loved the work I did in early intervention back when I was working for the man and not myself. Right?
Yeah.
And and I've also always had a fondness for relationship development intervention, which is a specific methodology that is an approach to work with autistic individuals. And I was fortunate enough to be trained in that methodology very early on in my career. I'm not a certified RDI consultant, but I've had lots of education and have done my own self-study in that and everything. And so back in like 2012 or so, I was working full time and then doing sessions after school. And I would have this one family that I worked with. And our focus was really me working with the parent and the child and focusing on RDI type style of interactions. And even though I would go to that family at the end of my day and it was a 12-hour workday, I would leave that house feeling so excited and so energized because I absolutely loved working in that capacity. And I just saw how much impact it had, both when I was in early intervention and when I had these opportunities to incorporate parents and families into the work I was doing with my students. how impactful that was and how much more progress that they made.
Hmm. Yeah.
And I think that the very first time I was on your podcast, we might have been talking about my program that I was using to teach my tactile hand cues
Hmm. Yeah.
to parents to produce speech sounds. So when I was working like that in schools, the reason that my students had so much success was because I would go out of my way to train the staff and the parents in how to do the hand cues and how to do the structured speech practice. And so everyone felt very competent to work with it with the child. So they weren't just getting it the 2 or 3 times a week that I had
Yeah.
the child in my therapy room. They were getting it in the classroom. They were getting it at home. Everyone was using the hand cues with them. And that was really the magic recipe that helped these children learn how to speak. So
Hmm.
I've just always, I think, partly had a natural inclination to know that this was important, and also over the years have been lit up by it and saw the great impact it has when we can incorporate parents into what we're doing as therapists.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, it seemed to me like the idea of parent coaching in EI came before we thought about it for older students. And I don't know if it's because we see the older students as more independent, and it's pretty obvious that a parent would need to be
Yeah.
involved if you have like, 0 to 6, for example. And I don't know, maybe I'm
Well,
just trying
that's
to
the
think
thing.
about, yeah,
Well, that was one of the things too that I recognized was we give such great support to parents in the early years,
hmm,
right? And then all of a sudden, when your child turns 5 or 6, it's not like that the need for that support
right.
appears, but then it
Sometimes it
all becomes
increases.
focused. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Especially as they get older, right?
Well, yeah, I know parents who are like, how do I help my 19-year-old college freshman that is
Yeah,
still like there are things that we wish we would have addressed earlier. We just didn't know. We didn't have the
right.
information and
Exactly. Yes. And I did forget to mention parent consulting is another service that I do through
yeah,
my practice. But yes, you're exactly right that the need for that parent training doesn't go away. And, you send your kid to school and then they might have a communication notebook that the school sends home. But like, what kinds of notes are you actually getting home on the day-to-day basis? It's mostly like, Johnny had a good day. He had chicken nuggets for lunch.
yeah.
Not
Or
giving
bad. The parents that
more
are like,
back.
every time the school calls, it's never anything good. I don't ever hear anything good from the school.
Right, right, exactly. And then or you'll hear like the child's doing really well at school, but the parents like, but not at home. Like they're
Yeah. Oh,
struggling
yeah.
at home. And then there's this mismatch.
So I want to go back to the RDI. Like,
Mhm.
what is the format for that, and what are some of the components of what that looks like when because I think that we all know, like, we're supposed to collaborate. We're supposed to train parents, we're supposed to train teachers, but sometimes it ends up being where you're like, okay, I'm going to go have this conversation, but what's the structure? What am I supposed to be doing? Because otherwise the communication ends up just being Johnny did a good job, or something kind of vague. So
Yeah.
how, like, what does that framework look like, and how does that structure the interactions that you might have with the parent?
Yeah. And I think that's one of the reasons I always loved RDI because it's a parent training program. RDI consultants work specifically with parents to train them in the methodology, and the parents are the facilitators of the program. So it really does teach parents how to interact and bond and connect with their child in really meaningful and fulfilling ways for both the parent and the child. So again, I'm not a certified RDI consultant, so I have kind of cherry picked my
Yeah.
favorite parts of RDI that I have learned over the years. And my 2 most powerful tools that I have gleaned from that program are declarative language
Mhm.
and co-regulation activities. Declarative language, do you want me to just kind of go into what
Yeah. So, and because
that?
I think one of the things that I get questions about a lot is I mean, just really, what does scaffolding mean first and foremost? Because I think there's all these, like, just kind of general terms, like we're supposed to gradually fade back prompts and don't act as your child's executive functioning, or gradually work through a hierarchy from easiest to hardest. So I think that sometimes even clinicians are like, what does that mean? So I can only imagine somebody who is in a classroom that has 25 other students to support, or a parent who doesn't have a clinical background and also might have to, be managing their household. Like, what does that mean? And I think declarative language is a specific technique that makes it more tangible so people can actually do it. Because otherwise, what ends up happening is, you should maybe in a situation allow your child to do something more independently rather than doing it for them, or like giving them all these direct commands and not letting them think through it on their own. But again, when you're busy and you're like, we got to get out the door, you just default to what your habits are. Right. If you don't have something else to replace it with. So yeah, like let's define it, and then maybe talk about some specific ways we can coach parents, coach teachers, or, basically take what we're doing in therapy and transfer it out to other settings.
Yeah. So most people, when they're talking to a child with a disability, or even any child, most people are either asking questions they already know the answers to,
yeah,
or they're giving directions.
Yes.
And there isn't a lot of space that the child or the young adult or the teen is given to problem solve and or even make mistakes to figure it out for themselves. There's a lot of jumping in and helping very quickly.
Yeah.
And I think that comes from parents genuinely wanting their children to be successful, or maybe when their kids were younger, they did need a higher level of support than they do now that they've gotten older. But the family, like to your point, has gotten into that habit of interacting, or they're coming from a behavioral background, which is telling people to prompt within 3 seconds of a non-response. And what happens is that causes the child, it really hinders the ability of the child to learn to be independent on their own, because they're not given the opportunity to practice problem solving, the opportunity to figure things out for themselves, because someone is always jumping in.
Yeah.
And the difference with declarative language, and one of the reasons why I love it so much, is it's so easy to learn. It's a simple concept. The tricky part with it is that you do have to consciously train yourself.
Yeah.
So language is just a different style of talking.
Right.
So you can do it anytime, anywhere. I mean, I will say that when you're first starting out, when you're at a time crunch trying to get your kids out the door, that's not the time to say, I'm going to practice declarative language.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
It's going to take a little longer at first. You want to start dripping it in when you have time to work.
Exactly. So, and like strategically pick one time a day when you can do it, and then stack on top of that.
Sure. The way that, well, first of all, so let me give some examples.
Yeah.
Declarative language, let's say I'm walking down the hallway with a child and I drop my pen. Imperative language, which is the language we typically use with kids, which is asking questions we already know the answers to or giving directions, right? Would be, can you pick up my pen? Point to the pen and like, can you give me my pen? It's like a direct instruction.
Or pick up the pen, just like a command.
Right.
Like a directive statement.
Yes. So with declarative language, I drop my pen. I might say something like, uh-oh, I dropped my pen. So I'm just commenting on what happened. And so the child then has to check in to their environment, maybe even check in with me, like, oh, is this to see if that's a problem for me or not, and infer and problem solve that I want him or her to pick up the pen. I
Mm-hmm.
didn't tell them that's what I wanted. They are using context clues to figure out for themselves that I want them to pick up the pen. And those are the skills that are so incredibly challenging to teach. So when you use declarative language on a regular basis, you are giving your child practice problem solving, reading the environment, checking in with people and situations and what's happening to figure out what their role in it is on a regular basis, which is hugely beneficial. There's so many more benefits that go along with
Yeah.
it.
Mm-hmm.
But so to your point, how do you start it? So I always tell parents the best way to start is just by increasing your awareness of how often you're asking questions you already know the answers to and giving directions. So that's the first step. Awareness is the first step to changing any habit, right?
Yeah.
So
Mm-hmm.
I don't want you to do anything different. Just take note of when you ask a question, catch yourself that you already know the answer to, or you're giving a direct instruction, and just think to yourself, okay, well, how would I have said this in a declarative way? So a declarative way is just you're making a comment or a statement. And I statements, if you can speak from a place of I, that's a very declarative way of speaking. So it's just making a comment or a statement that describes the situation you're in, describes what might need to happen. I like to use the magic I wonder phrase if
Yeah.
I can't think of how to state something in a declarative
Mm-hmm.
way. Like if I wanted to ask a question like, um, what do you think needs to go here? Like you as
Yeah.
an adult
Or even
knows
something
what
like,
needs to
where
go
is
there.
your, like, I know one just very general one is like, you know, like, where is my attention right now? Oh, like, what am I noticing? Or something
Yeah.
very general, or what are you, I know that you can say it from your perspective, but you can also do it for kids as well. But it's not, look at this right here and do this. It's
Yeah, so for
just
that
bringing them
example,
back.
yeah, like what are you paying attention to right now? In a declarative language way, you might say, I don't think I have your attention anymore.
Hmm.
And that
Yeah.
would, because again, I'm talking about my perspective. It also works on perspective taking.
Yeah.
And so I'm saying, I think I lost your attention. I don't think I have your attention anymore. And then the child can choose. And so it can have the impact of lowering a power struggle because the child feels like they have choice in the moment to decide how they're going to respond, if they're going to respond. So an excellent book by Linda Murphy, who is an RDI consultant, is called The Declarative Language Handbook. And she says that declarative language is an invitation.
Yeah. I think the thing that I like about the declarative language is that I think a lot of people listening are clinicians who want to know, how can I support parents? And they're typically, even if I have a clinician audience, they have kids of their own that are like, I need to use this for my child as well. And I know that there are parents listening as well, but I think it even could start with the clinician being more aware of what they do in their therapy session. And then
100%.
another
That's how it
question,
started for me.
yeah, well, and then the other thing is that with the carryover and the generalization, something that I always hear a lot is that like teachers aren't open to accommodations in their classrooms because they feel like it's this extra thing on their plate. And I'm a big proponent of using multiple service delivery models, using a coaching and consulting model. And this could, in private practice, tends to be more of the parent coaching just because you have more access to the parents because they're bringing their child to therapy. But
Right.
then in the schools, you can do it with parents, but then you end up really focusing more on how can I um, help the staff be
Yeah.
more confident and empower them. And I think one of the ways that you can make like help staff be more open to doing accommodations in their classroom is just increasing their toolbox at the tier one level, because then it's like, here's this thing that is going to be beneficial for all the students and it's already in my habits. So if I have to maybe do it more strategically for students who have accommodations on their IEP, it doesn't feel like this huge ask. So something like modeling declarative language and just
Yeah.
having a teacher just work that in for their whole class, where there might be some students where they need to be a little more specific and be like, okay, this group of students, like I have to for these tasks where we're seeing, avoidance and meltdowns and things like that, use more declarative language to kind of support them through it. They already know how to do it. So it's just,
Yeah.
and it's not, once you build the habit, it doesn't feel like it's this extra thing that you have to do. I'm going to take a quick break here to talk about the School of Clinical Leadership, my program that helps related service providers design programming and interventions to support students' executive functioning in school settings. Social skills groups are often seen as the entire intervention, and when they're delivered this way, they're often done in an academic format where an adult is leading the session and kids are answering questions or discussing various social rules and scenarios. This is a very small piece of what needs to happen. When we think of social skills intervention as just a lesson plan or social skills group, kids get really good at answering questions about how they should be acting in hypothetical situations. However, they often don't transfer any of those things over to real life. This is because real social interactions are not academic situations. We're actually not working on the skills preventing kids from using the information and knowledge we're trying to give them. In other words, we're not building the executive functioning skills kids need to be successful in social situations, not to mention other areas of life. Before you can successfully implement social skills intervention, you need to have a solid understanding of what executive functioning is, both the internal skills and the external behaviors, what successful intervention looks like and who needs to be involved, and what service delivery models can effectively address executive functioning. This is exactly what I show you how to do in the School of Clinical Leadership. In the program, you'll learn why kids continue to experience anxiety or behavioral challenges even though they're going to therapy or have a behavior plan, common mistakes multidisciplinary teams make when teaching executive functioning, and how to correct these mistakes, why kids struggle with problem solving and friendships even though they're going to pull out therapy and social skills groups, and most importantly, how to help your team work together to figure out solutions to all of these things. If you are in a related service provider role, if you're a speech pathologist, social worker, counselor, psychologist, occupational therapist, or other professional on a school team supporting students, you can emerge into a leadership role on your team and help to guide these interventions. I help you do that in the School of Clinical Leadership. To learn more about the program, you can go to drkarendudek-brannan.com/clinical leadership.
If you're talking about an educator or a provider or your child, if you're talking about a parent. And, when I worked in the schools, there were opportunities where I could do training with the other staff in my school, whether it was after school time, where there was a certain amount of time where the kids left and the staff had to stay. Maybe you can call like a 10-minute meeting or whatever once you feel firm and stable in how to use a methodology like declarative language, and then start talking to the staff and doing a mini in-service for the classrooms that you work with, or ask your principal if you can get 10 minutes in a staff meeting to talk about it.
Yeah.
So, or on professional development days, talk to your special ed director. Hey, can I do a 30-minute, training on declarative language for people? So that is a way that you can get the training for sure. And also, there's great resources. I know Linda Murphy has some great resources on her website in terms of declarative language, where it's just examples of how to say things declaratively. Like, this is how we might normally say something, and this is how we say something. And the other thing that when you are working with the staff or your coworkers and trying to get them to adopt a new way of speaking, you have to convince them of the value of it, right? You have to get their buy-in first and foremost. So maybe video record yourself in your therapy session and using declarative language and showing how your student is responding to it, so that the proof is in the pudding and they're seeing like, oh, wow, yeah, like I have to prompt him every step of the way when I work on that kind of stuff with him in class, but he's doing it completely independently with you.
Yeah. Hmm.
That's when you say, yeah, that's the power of declarative language. Let me tell you more.
And that you just said, and this is what I tell clinicians all the time, because I know that we have all this expertise, we have all this knowledge that we are excited to share. But if you want a teacher to do something in their classroom, you really have to think about what their pain points are. And one of the very common things that teachers bring to the table is like I'm trying to move my class along, and I have these students that are not able to follow along, and it's hard to manage, or it
Okay.
comes up as like behavior problem or something like that, and so they don't necessarily have a strategy for addressing it. So that is something that is where it's like you're addressing something that is this this thorn in their side that is always something they have to think about. And I think that's another way that you can get that buy-in, where it's here's this thing that you care about that is going to make your life so much easier. And I think that's the other thing when you do like with parent coaching, with teacher coaching, it can't necessarily feel like here's an extra thing that I have to do, even though it might technically be. It has to feel like
Yeah.
this is going to take something off my plate eventually and make my life easier in the long run, because
Right.
I'm not having to constantly prompt and
Right.
those kinds of things.
Right. And well, the beauty of it too is they don't have to necessarily carve out extra time in their day to learn
Right,
about declarative language or practice using it. You can just start using it in the
right. Embed
situation
it.
that you're already doing. So, like,
Uh-huh.
if you're a parent, maybe you say, okay, on the weekends, I'm going to try using declarative language as much as possible,
Right.
so that, it's a lower stakes time in terms of obligations and where you have to be. So it's okay if things take a little bit longer. And as a teacher, maybe you decide to do that during more of like a quieter time during the
Hmm.
class, like not necessarily like a lesson time or a
Right.
crazy group activity or anything
Right.
like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you just start trickling it in where you feel that you have the space for things to take a little longer. Because
Right. That's
the reason
huge.
I say that is because, first of all, just like we're not used to talking to our kids using comments and statements, our kids aren't used to being spoken to like that and don't
Yeah.
know how to respond to comments and statements. And if you think about having a conversation, and like with our autistic kids, we want them to become conversational, right? How many conversations do you have where all you're doing is a question answer session?
Right. They get
Not.
used to just waiting for
They're
somebody to
not.
prompt them.
Yeah, they're not question answer sessions. I make a comment, you respond to that comment, and then maybe there's a question in there thrown in, but it's mostly exchanges of comments. And
Yeah.
I find that when I'm in my buddy group program, my students struggle the most with making comments and responding to comments. And I think part of that is because it is the type of language they have the least amount of practice with, too.
Right.
Not the whole
Hmm.
picture, but it is a part of it. So when you do begin to use declarative language and you make a declarative statement, instead of saying pick up the pen, you say, oops, I dropped my pen, and
Hmm.
all of a sudden Johnny doesn't respond. Don't throw your hands up and say, okay, well, this doesn't work.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because Johnny's
That's
not used to responding like that.
right.
But the other thing you have to do is you have to pause.
Yep.
We
Hmm.
are not pausing enough with our students, with our children, with our young adults, with our teens. We are not pausing enough. So many times we ask a question, and if there's not a response right away, we're asking another question or another question. We have to, and a lot of our students have auditory processing challenges. So we need to like let it land, let it simmer, give them time to realize, oh, you're waiting for a response from me. What am I supposed to say? And then you would be surprised what will come out of a child's mouth when they are just given, when you just pause and wait. And if that's not enough, you don't then revert back to asking questions and giving directions. You give another declarative statement that provides a little more information. So
Yeah.
if saying, oops, I dropped my pen was not enough, you might say, my hands are full, I can't get my pen. So that's providing a little more information. If that's still not enough, You could say now, and I've been using declarative language, almost my whole 20-year career, and I still have to take a beat to say like, okay, how would I say this in a declarative way that would give more information? So in this situation with the pen, I would really love it if you could pick up my pen for me. So now
Yeah.
you're kind of embedding the instruction in there, but it is in a declarative language costume, right?
Right.
So you
Yeah.
still get all those benefits of the declarative language where they have to problem solve, they have the choice, the autonomy, but you just slowly, and this is the scaffolding part, right? You just put a little more information, a little more support if what you gave them initially was not enough. And too often, what I see where people go wrong with declarative language is they're not pausing enough after they say something, and then they're too quick to jump in with a prompt, a question, or a direction if the first declarative statement doesn't work.
Yeah. I think that's with like some techniques out there that are more rigid. It's like, this is the number of seconds that you have to wait and things like that. And I don't know that you can define it that specifically. I mean, yes, I understand that it's nice to have guidelines as a starting point, as long as we have some flexibility with them. And I think the other thing is that with the waiting and just giving yourself some time, and I completely understand this. And it happens a lot with writing assignments in schools. And I think at home, it's more like, packing the bags and getting out the door. Any time where the adult feels like there's this specific outcome that has to be achieved in a specific time frame, which it's like, I'm not diminishing that at all. If you're a teacher, you want to make sure that your students complete their writing assignments and have practice with these skills. If you're a parent, you have to make sure that everybody gets out the door on time or gets fed or that the house is taken care of and all of those things. So absolutely, all of that's valid. But I think that sometimes it's like, could you, if you're a teacher, have a time when you're working on a writing assignment? And yes, you're working on writing, but the point is the process and the pauses. And if you don't finish, like you finish what you finish, and maybe the student works on it later, like you want to get to the external outcome, but that's not the only thing. Like sometimes the process and the learning and the problem solving is more important in the moment than being like, we have to finish this assignment now, because then that's when you get into like the impatience and the prompting, and in the long haul, that's counterproductive because students aren't going to be able to do that independently.
Right. And if you think about a special education student, the process is what they need to learn the most.
Right. Yeah.
And if we are always rushing them through that just to get to the mechanics, then that's going to hinder them to be able to apply the mechanics independently when you're not around.
Mm-hmm.
So like the process is the foundation in which the mechanics can be built upon.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a big part of RDI, is the focus is on the process, not the end product.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, you're right. You have to maybe at first think about, okay, well, when can I find a time that my nervous system won't be triggered as the educator?
Right.
That I can relax into letting my student have the time they need and be okay with them not finishing. And maybe it's like you choose a lower stakes assignment to work on this with, where
yes,
that they know how to do that skill. So the skill isn't really the important thing to you, and maybe that will help your own peace of mind. But then you're focusing more on the product or the process, sorry.
Yeah. And that's how I always like when there's a new process for students, it's explicitly, there's some explicit instruction, or even telling students like, hey, here's where I need to just like, this is something new that we're all learning, and here's where I need to tell you what to do. But here's where I'm going to talk to you a little bit differently because I want your brain to start working, or even just telling them that you're going to, in certain places, you're going to start talking them to a little bit like, or you're going to start talking to them a little bit differently because that that they can do it, or something like that. And also when there's a new process, I always tell my clinicians that you start with a skill that the student can do. So if they're like, that it's a process issue, not a knowledge skill issue. And
Right.
that way you can work on the process. And then it's like, all right, we've got the process down. Now we can actually use the process to build more skills and knowledge.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. And, sometimes we have to, like, students do get learned helplessness. They
Yeah.
learn
Yeah.
prompt dependence. So you might want to say something like, if they ask for help and you think that they might be able to figure it out on their own, you can say something like, I would really like for you to give it a try on your own right now. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm here if you need help.
Mm-hmm.
You can reassure them that you're there, but I want to give you an opportunity to do this. Or I
Yeah.
have an adult on my caseload that I work with that has become very prompt dependent to the point where he'll know what to do, but still needs to say, like, we were working on learning how to use a Google Calendar recently, and he knows all the steps now of how to create the event, but he would say, click, change the color to blue, Rebecca, change the color to blue. And I said, I think you should trust yourself. I think you know
Yeah.
the answer. And so that sort of feedback is what really helps to build that independence. And
Mm-hmm.
and I use declarative language for all of it.
Yeah. I think sometimes it is habitual too, or I don't know if it's a nervousness or a habit or I just want confirmation from you or something like that. But how do you, because I hear this a lot as well. I know we've got just a couple minutes here, but one more question. How do you support the students who to number one, know when they do need to ask for help, because part of this is part of developing that awareness is self-advocacy so that as students grow older, they know how to advocate for themselves, but also to be able to accept help when they need it. Because I know that there are some times that I hear like, well, he won't accept help and he does need support with, XYZ, but he doesn't want the help. How do
Yeah.
you use this to support students who have different feelings about whether or not they need help?
Yeah. I mean, well, that's the thing with declarative language. You use it the same no matter the situation. You just
Mhm.
make a statement or a comment.
Yeah.
So, if you see in the situation where a child is resistant to receiving help, you could maybe say something like, I'm noticing you're having a little bit of a hard time with that. I'm here if you'd like me to help you.
Hmm.
Or I think that if you put that there, this will probably fall. You can kind of make a statement as to what
Hmm.
is going to happen. And again, it's the child's choice to listen to it,
Right. Hmm.
but because you're not saying, don't do that, you need to do this, let me help you, they still feel like they're in control, they're running the show, so they're more receptive to the help. So when kids are very keen to know when they're trying to be controlled and they want to fight for that independence. And when you're using declarative language, you're not taking their independence away from them, you're supporting it. So it might, by virtue of just using it, make that child more receptive to receiving the help. In terms of not knowing when to ask for help, you could say something like, it looks like I noticed that you haven't started your answer for question number 3. I'm here if you need help.
Hmm.
And then maybe that would be enough for them to say, yes, I need help. Or if a student says, I need help, I'll say, I don't know what you need help with. So
Yeah.
then because I find that sometimes my students will be able to say, help, please, or I need help, but they have a hard time describing the specific type of help that they need. And so when you are giving them practice saying the specific type of help they need in small situations, that is a start of advocating for themselves. Then they
Yeah.
start to learn how to ask for specific forms of help in more complex situations as they get older and older as well.
Yeah. And I think I'm curious if you've ever had situations where students are like, I need help, and you say, I don't know where you need help. And then they look around and it's like, oh, wait a minute. I think I'm okay, because they take that second to read the situation a little bit. Have you ever had that happen where they realize that maybe they can do a little bit more than they thought they could?
Yeah, or I might say, well, I think that you can do it if you start here or something
Mhm.
like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure that that happens for people as well.
Yeah. I mean, the getting started, especially with some of these,
Yes.
I mean, honestly, for me, it's writing or cleaning, things that we don't like to do.
Hmm.
And really the getting that first step and that initiation that's big for a
Yeah,
lot of
yeah.
people,
And it's
for the
okay
adults
to
too.
yeah, exactly. And it's okay to help get started because you're going to create that positive momentum. And sometimes that difficulty with getting started is the resistance, right? And if
Yes.
you can get
Mhm.
them over that hump, then the child might be more willing to continue on their own from there.
Yeah,
Yeah, and that's
absolutely.
like co-regulation, which is the other component from RDI that I am just over the moon. Like it's one of my most powerful therapy tools. That's really helpful in working together to get through challenges like that and helping your child get started so that they can do the rest on their own. But you know, that's a topic
That's
for
another podcast, but I mean, the main thing is that it's you want to maintain your own level of regulation because you're kind of
yeah,
setting the tone for the interaction. And if you're like, oh my gosh, we have to get this done, that's
yeah,
gonna kind of bring things up. Whereas if everything is calm and you can regulate yourself, then it can help have an impact on the other people around you. But that's a
right.
very short synopsis.
Yes. Yeah. No, it's true. And you know, there is a difference between a perceived need to get things done in a certain time versus
Mhm.
actual need.
Right.
And
Yeah.
sometimes we let our fear of what will happen if XYZ doesn't occur
Yeah.
govern how we're responding in the moment, when if we really take a breath and take a step back, we realize, well, no, there actually isn't this much urgency. Well, actually, yeah, I can let him do two problems now and we can put it aside and come back to another day. Or maybe
Yeah.
I can email my parents, my kid's teacher, and say, this was really tough. Do you mind if we have the weekend to work on it and then we'll
Hmm.
give it to you
Yeah.
on Monday?
Yeah. And I think that's a great example because, and I am a huge proponent of skill-based learning and reading and math and having adequate time to practice those skills. So I know
Mm-hmm.
that that's a huge concern that educators have where it's, but we need practice with like the math facts and the numeric, number sense and practice reading and decoding and all of that is completely legit. But sometimes in the moment, it's like, the getting through the process is the process. And if you could sit down for 5 minutes and do something and learn how to work through and get started, you're actually making progress, even if you didn't work on the skill, because eventually you are going to be able to work on the skill. And I think that that's why sometimes people give up and it's like, we didn't get anything done. And it's like, well, the getting things done was maybe getting started in
Right,
that moment. And
right.
it's, we're not diminishing the skills and the academic stuff. We're just saying that we need to make sure that we know how to get started in order to get to the point that we can start moving through some of those more academic things.
Yeah, and also managing our expectations, we can't,
Yeah.
if a child is at the place where it's a drag down knockout fight just to get them to sit at the table and pick up the pencil, then
Yeah.
it's not a realistic goal for them to complete a full academic worksheet. The
Right.
goal
Yeah.
is for them to willingly come sit down at the table and pick up the pencil. Because
Right.
until
That's
that happens,
progress.
nothing else is going to
That's huge.
happen.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, that is huge. I think that's the biggest piece of advice that I could give parents where it's, you don't have to sit down and work for an hour. Like if you
Right.
can sit down and get started for 5 minutes and
Yeah.
then the next day it's, eventually then you
We
can do 10
build on
minutes
that
and so on.
positive momentum.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. You
Yeah.
want to create positive momentum and always And I was going to say with parents, but with educators too, like our
Mm-hmm.
kids
Yeah.
need to know that our bond and our relationship to them is paramount to anything else. So if you have gotten into a situation with a student where it is a power struggle every single time you're working together, that's an indication that you need to drop all of the expectations and just work on repairing your rapport with that student. Because until that rapport is repaired, you're going to stay in that resistance with that student. And it's the same thing with the parents. If you find yourself, you're in this same power struggle over and over and over again, you need to just take a break, as long as it's not like a safety concern, right? Or something
Mm-hmm.
that is truly urgent, like a medical situation or something like that. Let's take a break from that, repair the bond, because once that is repaired, that's when you're going to start to be able to make progress towards the actual skill that you want to work on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I know you have a ton of great resources on all the things that you're sharing. So where can people go to learn about the work that you do and some of the programs that you offer and resources that you have?
Yeah, so definitely check out my YouTube channel. It's just at Mind ShaperSLP. I have a whole playlist about declarative language. I have a video that breaks it down. What is it? How to use it? And I also have a couple of videos on there where there's sneak peeks into sessions that I'm doing with my actual students. I work virtually, so you'll hear my student in the background, but you'll see me working with them, and you can see me using declarative language in real time. And those videos are with older students, a teen and an adult. So
Mm-hmm.
one is more of like a life skill, executive functioning calendar scheduling task, and the other is more of like an academic type of task. So you'll see me using declarative language in those contexts. I also have some videos up there about co-regulation. So YouTube is a great place to go. I'm
Mm-hmm.
on all the socials, Facebook,
Okay.
Instagram,
We'll
just
link
at
to all that.
MindShaperSLP. And my website is mindshaperslp.com.
Great. Well, we'll link to all that. And thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for listening. Be sure to check the show notes for all the resources that were mentioned in this episode. And be sure to check out the School of Clinical Leadership, my program that helps related service providers put executive functioning support in place in collaboration with their school teams using multiple service delivery models. So I show you how to do direct intervention, and I also show you how to coach and train others so that you can ensure students get support across their day. Remember that it helps me so much if you tell your friends and colleagues about De Facto Leaders, and if you follow me and leave me a rating or review wherever you listen to your podcasts, whether you listen on Apple or Spotify or another podcast network. And finally, if you're interested in collaborating with me, if you'd like to invite me to be on your podcast, if you would like to be a guest on De Facto Leaders, or if you have a suggestion for a guest for De Facto Leaders, please email me at talktome@drkarenspeech.com. As always, thank you so much for listening, and I will see you next time.